The essence of charity is for the servant to recount the blessings of his Lord, and to render thanks unto him at all times and under all conditions. Baha'u'llah. Charity is pleasing and praiseworthy in the sight of God, and is regarded as a prince among goodly deeds. Blessed is he who preferreth his brother before himself. Verily, such a man is reckoned, by virtue of the will of God, the all-knowing, the all-wise, with the people of Baha who dwell in the crimson ark. They who are possessed of riches, however, must have the utmost regard for the poor. For great is the honor destined by God for those poor who are steadfast in patience. By my life, there is no honor except what God may please to bestow that can compare to his honor. Great is the blessedness awaiting the poor that endure patiently and conceal their sufferings, and well is it with the rich who bestow their riches on the needy and prefer them before themselves. Abdul Baha.
Thank you so much. So now I'll introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker this week is Mr. Steve Sarowitz, and his topic is Faith and Philanthropy. Mr. Steve Sarowitz is founder and chairman of Paylocity, director of Payescape, a UK payroll provider, and co-chairman of Wayfarer Studios. He is an international philanthropist with an interest in promoting unity and promoting education and advocating for the elimination of racism, sexism, nationalism, and religious prejudice. Steve served as executive producer for the award-winning documentaries Maya Angelou and Still I Rise, and The Gate, Dawn of the Bahai Faith. Steve is married with 2 children and holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Illinois. And with that, I'll hand it off to Mr. Sarowitz.
Good morning, everybody. I guess I should start out with a little bit about the Baha'i Faith. So I've been a Baha'i for 8 years now. The Baha'i Faith is the newest religion in the world. What we believe as Baha'is is that God has progressively revealed the truth through a series of messengers. The latest of which, the most recent, is Baha'u'llah. So we're followers of Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God. We believe in the oneness of humanity. That's the essential teaching of Baha'u'llah, that women are equal to men, that the earth is but one country and mankind is citizens, that there's only one race, the human race, and perhaps most importantly, that all the great religions of the world, rather than competing with each other, are really chapters, beautiful chapters in a single religion of God. And so today, I'm here to talk a little bit about faith and philanthropy. So philanthropy is really about the love of humanity, and philanthropy is about using resources, if you are lucky enough to have them, for the betterment of the world. And so the question is, what role does faith play in philanthropy? And I'm going to touch on my Baha'i faith as I talk about philanthropy. So a little bit about my personal history. I was raised in a very middle-class family. Really wasn't raised wealthy at all. My family, my sisters are not wealthy. My parents are not wealthy. And I started a company called Paylocity, which went public in 2014. I came into some significant wealth. And so the question was, what do I do with it? Do I buy a yacht? Do I buy several houses? For me, that wasn't important. For me, although we actually do own more than one house, that's more my wife than me. I'm satisfied with a house. I'm satisfied with it, not even a fancy car. For me, it seemed like if God gives us money, then that's money to be shared. That really, we're only on this earth to really help each other. And so the first thing I'd say is that philanthropy is practiced on a number of different levels. You can be a philanthropist on a small level or like me on a larger level. The most important thing is that each of us must do our part to help others. Because I've been given great wealth, I have a little bit greater responsibility. And so Baha'u'llah says that the rich, but for a few, shall in no way attain essentially our heart's desire, which is, of course, to be united with God. And so we, as myself as one of the wealthy in the world, we have a great responsibility to detach from that wealth and to use that wealth as a tool. And to me, my faith guides me as I'm using that wealth. And I'll give you some examples. So a few years ago, I started actually When our company first went public, we started something called the Julie and Grace Foundation. And through Julie and Grace, we've helped over 100 nonprofits. Most of what we give to is nonprofits that serve and are typically run by BIPOC people, which is people of color. Also, we favor nonprofits that serve and or are run by women. The reason we do this is not because we have any preference for people of color or women over anybody else. We believe that all of us are one human family. The reason we do this is because the world isn't just, the world isn't fair, and the world isn't equitable. And if you look at America in particular, where most of the work we do is done, people of color have had less traditionally. And so what we do with our philanthropy is try to work with communities to try and elevate those who've had less. And one of the major goals we have with Julie and Grace, and now my newer foundation, which is Wayfarer Foundation. So 3 years ago, I started Wayfarer Foundation. First year, we gave away $1 million. The next year, we gave away a little bit, about $4 million. The next year, we gave away, which was last year, $9.5 million. And this year, our goal is $19 million. So we're rapidly rolling up and increasing the rate of giving away money. Very much like Julie and Grace, we're giving to typically communities of color and or female-run nonprofits, again, for the same reason. But what we look for with both Julie and Grace and with the Wayfarer Foundation is to work with communities. We're not looking to impose our will, but we're looking to work as a partner. I'm fond of saying the wind beneath your wings. I'm not looking to start a nonprofit in your neighborhood and say, here, I'm going to start this nonprofit, here's what you need. I'm looking for nonprofits that are already established. I'm looking for nonprofits that have already looked and said, what is the problem in our neighborhood? And I'm looking to give them the resources to grow. A couple of examples of that, which I'm very fond of. Service Learning Micro Schools in Tampa it's run by a Baha'i by the name of Jamie Manfra, and they're doing education in small schools. And what they're doing is they're doing a secular and a spiritual education. So they're doing material and spiritual education all at once. And so we're big supporters of this, because if you look at the world today, we're lacking almost entirely, if you look at the world in general, in spiritual education. I actually had an interfaith breakfast right before this, and the person who was the main speaker, afterwards we were talking, he said, well, you almost can't say the word religion today. And it's true. In many places in America, you can't say the word religion. And I was talking to another person after, they said, well, I'm a Christian, but Christianity isn't a religion. And I said, well, I beg to differ with you. I tried to do it politely because I'm a Baha'i. Christianity is a religion. It's always been a religion. If you look it up on Wikipedia or in the dictionary, it's a religion. But people are afraid to say it's a religion because religion has gotten such a bad name. Philanthropy needs faith. Philanthropy needs meaning. And what we need to do with every action, I believe, as a Baha'i, is make our faith infuse every action we take with this, with the principles and the spirit of our faith. So what I do with my philanthropy, like I do with my business, like I do with everything else, is every step I take, I'm thinking about what would Abdul Baha do, who's our exemplar in the Baha'i Faith, the son of Baha'u'llah. What would Abdul Baha do in this situation? What would Abdul Baha do in that situation? And how can we get spirituality into this philanthropy? The main speaker today at the event I went to, who invited me, is a friend of mine, and he's called the Angel of Lower Wacker Drive. And he actually feeds the homeless. He's been doing it for many years, and he does it here in Chicago. And Dr. Pat Angelou is his name. And he told us a story. He told us a story about a couple. He said that the solution they're putting billions of dollars towards in California is to build homes for the homeless. So they're putting billions of dollars towards a solution. He says, that's the wrong solution. You can't give them homes. You have to understand what the problem is. He said, the problem is they're heroin addicts. And he cited a recent time here in Chicago where they gave a home to a couple. And the couple both ended up in the hospital because the extra money they had went to extra drugs, and they got even sicker than they already were. So one of the things you have to do in philanthropy is you have to understand what the problem is. And so, as I said, working with community is very important, but also working from a spiritual lens is extremely important. So instead of just saying, here's a house, that's a material thing, we're going to take care of your material problems, we have to feed ourselves spiritually. So what are spiritual solutions? Well, education is extremely important. Education and spiritual values is extremely important. So it doesn't help if I give people material means, but I don't help them spiritually. So every single nonprofit that Wayfarer Foundation gives to, we ask them the same question. We say, what is your spiritual reason for being? And so they have to look at the spiritual virtues. Am I promoting unity? Am I promoting mercy, compassion? Justice is a big one. And how am I doing that? Am I promoting love and kindness? Am I promoting truthfulness? If I just feed people, it's not bad to help the poor. Abdul-Baha did that. It's a very good thing. But Abdul-Baha always fed us spiritually. With every step he took, he was always teaching, always demonstrating. He was literally reflecting all the spiritual virtues of God with every step he took. And that's what I try to do. Of course, I'm not Abdul-Baha, never will be. But every day as Baha'is, we try to walk in the steps of Abdul-Baha, and we try to help with everything he's done and everything he did every day. And so what do I try to do with, what does Wayfarer try to do? We give to organizations that help people of color. Now, why? Why do I do that? Why don't, if Baha'u'llah says it doesn't matter what color your skin is, why do I lean that way? Because in America, just the color of my skin, if you knew nothing else about me, I'd be 10 times more wealthy on average than a person of color, than a Black person. Well, that's not just, that's not equitable. And so when we give, we should look at those things. We should look and say, we all have a pie. I've got 3 pieces and you have 1. Well, if I give you one of my pieces, now we each have 2. And I'm always trying to find the people who have 1 piece, or in most cases, 0 pieces, and start sharing the pie. The other thing I don't do is I typically don't help individuals. And it's very hard for me as a billionaire not to help individuals, but I almost never help individuals. And the reason is I'm trying to use my money in the most effective way. And so I'm looking at organizations that actually go and hit the core problem. And the key problem, again, the spiritual problem. So even going back to my friend Pat, the angel of Lower Wacker Drive, he helps the homeless every day. It's not a focus of what I do. It's not to say I wouldn't give money to a homeless person, I might, but typically what I'll do if they ask for money is I feed them. I don't actually give them cash, because cash only pays for the drugs. Typically, and as Pat said, today, most of them are heroin addicts. Well, is it helping the world to get them heroin? Well, it might help them in the short run, but it's not going to help the world in the long run. And you might even argue that feeding them won't help either. You'd probably be right, but I at least would rather feed a hungry person, even if they're a heroin addict, than to give them drugs. So in every situation, I try to take the highest road possible. Another nonprofit we give to is run by the great Michael O'Neill. It's called Parent University, and I'll cite them as an example of a great nonprofit. First of all, he started as a Baha'i. Michael's been a Baha'i since 1975. And a little over 20 years ago, Michael asked his community, what do you need? And they had a whole community group and they consulted, which for those of you who aren't Baha'is, everyone puts their ideas in the room and they all share their ideas, and then we figure out which ideas make sense. And they consulted and they realized that a lot of money was going towards children and educating children, but not a lot of money was going to the adults in the family. So you have family units, and the parents really, they weren't set on fire by education. They weren't inspired by education. Education to them didn't mean anything. And so the kids were coming home to parents who were not feeding them. So they were going to school, but then they'd come home and they had no support. And what Parent University does, it educates the parents and gets the parents, infuses the parents with the love of school. And it's been extremely effective in Savannah, Georgia. If you don't believe me, go talk to the mayor of Savannah, who will sell you on Parent University for an hour if you're willing to listen. So Michael has expanded to Pensacola. He's expanded to Chicago, to Atlanta. He's got lots of other cities knocking on his door. And again, it's a program that works. What's key about it is it was started to serve the community. It was started within the community, and it was really started as a grassroots effort. Most of the nonprofits we support at Wayfarer Foundation are grassroots. Most of them are community-run organizations, and most of them serve people of color and/or women. And again, we're looking at lifting up communities. And I think that's really important. Is when we look at philanthropy, a lot of philanthropy, if you look at it, if you look at the percentage of money going to philanthropy, is not that way. So citing what's happening in California with the homeless, you've got billions of dollars going to house the homeless. But nobody's asked if that's the key problem. What is the key problem? Drug addiction. Disconnection from society. What are we doing for that? And if you can take some of those $1 billion and put them towards counseling, towards drug rehab, towards programs that prevent people from becoming drug addicts in the first place. So the question is, why is our society having, has anyone ever asked, why is our society having an epidemic of drug addiction and overdose? I just recently went to my son's college. My son goes to San Diego State University, who's in the Final Four in basketball. But San Diego State has some problems, as do many colleges. In fact, they just talked about this this week. There's a product called Narcan, and Narcan was just approved to be over the counter. What Narcan does is it reverses a drug overdose. So if someone is overdosed on heroin or fentanyl, it reverses that and saves their lives. And San Diego State, when I went there, they said, oh, we have 1,000 cases or whatever they are called of Narcan. And that was their solution to the drug addiction problem on their campus. Because every week, someone's overdosing, or every couple of weeks, they have a student overdosing. So they have Narcan around, and they can save their lives. And they said, well, no one's died. And I looked at them, some of the administrators, and I said, guys, that's not a solution. Saving these kids from dying of a drug overdose at the age of 20 is not a solution. Let's figure out why they're killing themselves. Let's figure out why half the campus is stoned. Why are I watch the kids walk around. My son, who's been sober for 2 years now, says to me, I don't want to live around these kids. This is my son, who's 20 years old, which I'm very proud of him, because the kids are walking around drunk and stoned at all hours of the day. Why? Has anyone ever asked why children who are in the prime of their life, you're physically and mentally at the prime of your life, going to a college with so many other kids, are so depressed that they have to dull the pain with drugs and alcohol? Why are we doing this as a society? What's causing this? My friend Rainn Wilson has just come out with a book called Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. And that's indeed what we need. And so to me, philanthropy should be feeding this spiritual revolution. We should be starting programs in the arts and music. And that's what we do. We support that. We support community-led organizations that uplift communities. We need to do things, in my opinion, that unite communities, that give people a sense of connection all around the country. And we need to give people hope. When people turn to drugs and alcohol, they've lost hope. They're numbing the pain of the world, which to me is strange, because not to say I don't see the pain of the world, I don't understand why you would numb the pain. Let's figure out how to figure out the source of the pain and treat it. And that's kind of how I look at philanthropy. I don't want to build another hospital wing. I don't want to build another building on a campus. I mean, we could do that. And maybe we will do that, but what about building a system or a program that helps communities? We do a lot of work at Wayfarer with Native Americans. Why? Because Native Americans have systemically been oppressed in this country. Unbelievable, the lies we've told, the treaties we've broken, and it's left the Native community in a lot of pain. So we have stepped in, Wayfarer Foundation, and we're working with several different Native American nonprofits. Again, we're working with them on the community level. So what's amazing is I went to the Native American reservations, and I stayed in, I went into some sweat lodges. And when I realized that this Native American religion that we came upon, that the Christians came upon a few hundred years ago, which, you know, if you read the books and see the movies to this day, it's still, Native Americans are still depicted to some extent as savages. I did realize after I went there that there were savages involved when the Native Americans met the Europeans. It's just that perhaps the wrong people were labeled as savages. The Native Americans in many ways were spiritually more advanced, but they weren't Christians. And so they were labeled as savages. But their Native American religion was very interesting, because natively in their religion was the idea of world unity. So part of what we're doing there is encouraging them to go into these religious traditions and to really help their spirit. You know, that it's really hard when you've been oppressed, when people have been oppressed, for them to lean into the spirit, because when you don't have enough to eat, when things look bleak, the alcohol and the drugs look very good. When there's trauma involved, there's tremendous trauma in communities of color in America. So some of our nonprofit, our giving is to heal the trauma. Some of it is to bring hope. A lot of it, and every part of it, is infused with the Baha'i teachings. So we do support with Wayfarer. Most of what I do is Baha'i oriented. A lot of times I'm directly supporting Baha'is, but a lot of the nonprofits I support are not Baha'is, but they're doing what the Baha'i Faith says. And another thing, and this is especially true for people who aren't Baha'i, as a Baha'i, I don't care if you're a Baha'i, I'm going to help you if I can. I just talked to someone last night and I said, I'm on the local spiritual assembly. You live in our community. If you ever want to come. We're here to serve you. A local spiritual assembly is here to serve the community. Baha'is are here to serve the world. And what I do is I look for people we as Wayfarer Foundation look for people who are doing things along the lines of the Baha'i writings. So what do the Baha'i writings say to do? Well, they say women are equal to men. So are we promoting women's rights? There's only one race, the human race. Are we promoting the oneness of humanity? Are we promoting the end of racism, which is still a big problem in this country? Are we helping immigrants? Because the earth is but one country and mankind is citizens. That's what Baha'u'llah said. So we work with nonprofits that help immigrants in this country. And are we promoting spiritual teachings so we can get at the core of the problem? So again, dividing philanthropy, I'm very fond of saying that there's two types of philanthropy. One is Band-Aid philanthropy, where you have the problem, you just look at the material end of the problem. And you put a Band-Aid on it because it's a cut. And then it gets cut again, you put another Band-Aid, and then just repeat. Cut, Band-Aid, cut, Band-Aid, cut, Band-Aid, cut, Band-Aid. And this is a process, and this, by the way, is the majority of the philanthropy I see. We're not looking at the source of the problem. We're looking at the symptom of the problem, and we're treating the symptoms. We do this throughout our society, in our medical field, in almost everything you see, we treat symptom, not source. And what I say is try to find the real problem. What is the real reason we have homeless people? What is the real reason that we have drug addiction? What is the real reason we have violence? What is the real reason that people have lost hope? All of these problems have spiritual roots. And so all of these problems must, by necessity, have spiritual solutions to economic problems. As a philanthropist, my job is to try and add the resources that I can, to fix the problems and the resources to the programs, again, that are already out there. I don't have the time to start a nonprofit. I'm very busy, but I do have the resources, and Wayfarer Foundation has the resources. I should mention the great Laura Herrick, who runs Wayfarer Foundation, who every time someone meets her, they say she's amazing, because she is. And she's a Baha'i, but she's wonderful at applying. She's wonderful at applying the Baha'i principles to everything we do. Now, by the way, we don't just help Native Americans. We don't just help Black people. We don't help women. We disproportionately help them, because that's disproportionately where the challenges are. But for us, we only look at where the challenges are. So frankly, we will help anybody, we'll help any community, as long as we're doing the things according to the Baha'i writings. And so I see a note there, someone, and I'll address that later. So whiteness and white supremacy, that's a long conversation. I will address that, but let me finish talking, because that's not a simple answer. One thing I will say is in July 22nd, 2020, the Universal House of Justice addressed a letter to, and actually I'm going to pull up the letter now. July 22nd, 2020, Universal House of Justice. If you haven't read this letter, I highly recommend it. It's to the Baha'is of the United States. And it starts off with: a moment of historic portent has arrived for your nation as the conscience of its citizenry is stirred, creating possibilities for marked social change. Starts off with that, and it's really all about racism. It's about addressing racism. It goes on to say, we ardently pray that the American people will grasp the possibilities of this moment to create a consequential reform of the social order that will free it from the pernicious effects of racial prejudice and will hasten to the attainment of a just, diverse, and united society that can increasingly manifest the oneness of the human family. So the oneness of the human family is really a center point. And one of my favorite lines is this: racism is a profound deviation from the standard of true morality. It deprives a portion of humanity of the opportunity to cultivate and express the full range of their capability and to live a meaningful and flourishing life, while blighting the progress of the rest of humankind. It cannot be rooted out by contest and conflict. It must be supplanted by the establishment of just relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions of society that will uplift all and will not designate anyone as other. So, and go on to the next paragraph. Ultimately, the power to transform the world is affected by love, love originating from the relationship with the divine, love ablaze among members of a community, love extended without restriction to every human being. I highly encourage everyone, if you haven't read that letter, to read the whole letter and then read it again. But going back to whiteness, I am white. I'm not guilty about it either. I am white. I am privileged. I'm not guilty about that. What are you doing with your whiteness? What are you doing with your privilege? That's important. We cannot be accusing someone of a crime based on the color of their skin, whether they're white or they're Black or they're brown. The enemy is racism. So going back to the question that was asked, we need to eradicate racism. We need to eradicate hatred, and we need to eradicate separation. We cannot do that by attacking white people. We cannot do that by attacking Black people. We have to work together, white, Black, brown, all the colors, to eradicate these terrible, pernicious things that the Universal House of Justice is talking about. White supremacy is one of them. I have to eradicate that in my own self and work to help eradicate it with others. And we have nonprofits that we're supporting that are helping do that. One of them, Embrace Race, that's run by a non-Baha'i, but it's right along the lines of the Baha'i Faith. It's an African-American man, and he's doing education. I think education is really important in this subject. It's really encouraging deep friendships between the black and white and brown, people of different colors, and really encouraging us all to attack this from a position of oneness. And the idea that racism, as the letter says, as the Universal House of Justice says, is something that affects all of us. It's a blight on all of us. How is it a blight on all of us? How is it a blight on me? I'm a white man. I'm a wealthy, I'm a tall, those of you who don't know me, I'm 6'6". I'm able-bodied. I'm white. I have every kind of privilege. I'm straight and cisgender. I mean, I have every kind of privilege imaginable. How is racism hurting me? If we truly understand reality, as Baha'u'llah explained it, we are one human soul, and our family is one. And I am one with my black brothers and sisters and my brown brothers and sisters, and anything that truly hurts them also hurts me. It also increases crime, poverty, all sorts of things that make society worse for all of us. And me giving up a little portion of my wealth to help eradicate this helps me. It doesn't hurt me, it helps me. Frankly, if I could give up 100% of my wealth and go live in poverty today, if I could solve the problem of racism by doing that, I would do it today. I know I can't. I am, over the next 15 years, going to give away the majority of my wealth, the great majority of my wealth. And most of it will go towards eradicating things like racism. But I think it's very important when we talk about this, that we talk about it in a loving way where no one is labeled as the other, and that includes white people. My privilege doesn't make me bad. The fact that I have privilege is bad. That's not my fault. I didn't ask for it. But it is something I have to address, and I have to walk through the world with this privilege, understanding this privilege, acknowledging this privilege, and become aware of it to address it. And to really work on how to create a world where this privilege doesn't exist. And it's something that we all, believe me, I'm not perfect. I'm one very flawed human, but we're trying with the Wayfarer Foundation to work and to create a world. And so to create a world where white privilege doesn't exist, where everyone gets the same treatment when they walk in the room, whether you're a woman, whether you're a person of color, whether you're Native American. You know, there's prejudice against Middle Easterners. I have a friend who's Persian, who was in England, whose neighbors for almost 30 years treated her terribly until they realized how nice she was, and then came and apologized. I mean, I think it was over 20 years they did this. What we need to do is eradicate all the differences, whether it be differences of race, differences of religion, differences of gender, differences of nationality, and understand our oneness, and start infusing society with that oneness. My philanthropy is only one way to do that. I do it also with impact investing. I do it with the teaching I do every day. I try to teach the Baha'i Faith every day. And someone just posted music. And yes, I've supported Baha'i musicians. And so I think we each can do what we can do. Could I do more? I'm sure. Could I do it better? I'm sure I could. But I'm doing my best every day to try and spread Baha'u'llah's word, and trying to, and most importantly, to live Baha'u'llah's word. With that, I think I've spoken long enough. I'd love to start opening it up to questions. I see there's a lot of things in the chat. So maybe I can start addressing things in the chat.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your talk. So yeah, we already have some questions. One question is, although helping women, Blacks, and Native Americans is praiseworthy, it is really a symptom approach. The root cause is the disease of whiteness and white supremacy. If you agree, then how are you addressing that with your wealth?
Well, the root cause is racism, not white supremacy. White supremacy is a part of racism, but the root cause is racism. It's probably splitting hairs to say that, but I want to say it that way because when you say that white people are the problem, you lose a lot of people in the room. White people start getting defensive, white people leave the room, and white people can't help create the solution. To me, the solution is all of us working together to really make things a lot more equitable. You know, so I'm supporting education for people of color. I'm supporting scholarships, and I'm supporting arts programs. I'm supporting all sorts of things to make the world more equitable. And I can't say that I can't eradicate white supremacy by myself, and I'm working on myself. So working on myself every day to make sure that when I walk through the world, I walk through the world loving everybody I meet equally and not treating anybody as less than or other. That's really what the letter from the House of Justice says. I think when you start talking about white supremacy as being the sole problem, I think you end up getting into a combative mode, and the combative mode doesn't solve the problem. And that's kind of what the letter, and that's just my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's the way I see it. I do think white supremacy is a problem, but I think when you kind of center it, it pulls us away from the solution, which is all of us pitching in to change the historic inequity, to address the historic inequity, and to eradicate the prejudices that still exist.
Thank you. Another question we have is, could you please tell us about any philanthropy projects that you find particularly exciting?
Well, I mentioned a couple. I mentioned Parent University, and the Mona Foundation is one of my favorites. They support schools, typically for women all over the world. I mentioned Embrace Race. We have some interfaith things we do. Let's see. We are supporters of the Parliament of World Religions. We have a parliament happening this August in Chicago, which was interesting because the Parliament of the World Religions was the first place that Baha'u'llah was mentioned in the West in 1893, or one of the first places. And that Parliament of World Religions was with the World's Fair in Chicago. That was so controversial that it was 100 years later that the next Parliament of the World's Religions actually happened. So, and that was actually, in 1893, there were no Baha'is in North America. In 1993, when the next Parliament happened, the main force behind the Parliament happening was from the Baha'is. So I think it's really important for us to have religious talks and discussions so we can get out of the boxes and get rid of religious prejudice.
Thank you. Another question we have is, how can people who don't have as much wealth also engage in philanthropic endeavors?
Well, there's always a huge need to donate your time. So go find a local nonprofit. Go, who do you care about? Do you care about the homeless? Do you care about feeding the hungry? Do you care about women's shelters? What is something, do you care about people who are recovering from drug addiction? What is something that you can serve? And anyone can serve. If you have a little bit of time or a little bit of money, it doesn't have to be a lot. You can give time once a week or once a month at a local nonprofit, even if you can't give money. You can help raise money. Maybe not your money, but help others. You can pitch in.
Thank you. We have another question. Can you speak to the possibility of forming a coalition of billionaires who might invest their money as a collective for the purpose of creating free and equal education to all with their proceeds?
Well, coalitions of billionaires are hard because billionaires tend to be independent. But I am starting to get involved with some wealthy organizations to try and encourage other people to be more spiritual in their giving. There are coalitions of billionaires already. The Gates Foundation, the Giving Pledge, which I have not signed only because my wife hasn't let me sign it. Eventually, if my wife ever changes her mind, I will sign it, which is the pledge to give away at least $500 million, at least half your wealth, which I'm already doing, and we'll be well over that pretty soon. I think that for me, eventually I could get there and get billionaires together. Right now, I'm still working on establishing myself as a philanthropist. I'm still pretty new at it and trying to inspire others. Over time, I would love to do that. I'd love to create, I'd actually like to really teach more billionaires the Baha'i Faith, because if we had a few more Baha'i billionaires, that would be very helpful to the world. So if you know of any billionaires who are interested in the Baha'i Faith, I'm happy to talk to
them. Thank you. What do you think of the cause of the drugs, mental health, homeless problems? Do you think Strength of Family Foundations will help reduce these problems?
Well, it's a spiritual crisis. We have a spiritual crisis. We are collectively a society that's turned from God. I always talk to young people. I say the same thing. I say, have you taken a shower today? Oh, yeah. Have you eaten food today? And they look at me kind of funny, like, of course I have. Why wouldn't I? And then I say, have you fed your soul today? What have you done to feed your soul? And you'd be amazed how little they've thought of that. Most of them believe they have a soul. And only a few of them think about feeding their soul every day. So what do they feed their souls? They have a hole in their souls. I'm talking about young people where there's a lot of problems with drugs. And this is true of older people. But in order to get rid of drug addiction, you have to feed the hole in the soul. And how do you do that? With prayer, with meditation, with service, really practicing the spiritual virtues, music and arts, nature, but really, and of course, community. You need community. There's a big study on alcoholics that says lack of community, lack of connection. But it's a spiritual problem. We really need to advance spiritually. And the writings of Baha'u'llah are the vehicle to do that. Baha'u'llah says, immerse yourself in the ocean of my words. And so it's really important for us to do that.
Thank you. Another question asks, can you speak more about immigration projects Wayfarer is involved with?
So actually, I do a lot more on that through Julie and Grace. We work with a group called Mano a Mano, which helps a lot of primarily Hispanic immigrants. We have another one called, it's in Joaquin, I gotta remember it now, Heart of the City, which is a soccer program, which has helped thousands of people over the years, mostly immigrants. We have another program we support that is free immigration work, immigration attorneys. We actually do that through a couple different nonprofits. So, the immigration system in our country is, again, very inequitable. And a lot of it has to do with racism and prejudice. The image of an immigrant is Hispanic. And, what we have to do is fight this image in our head that they're less than. You look at the typical person who's Hispanic, they might be a little shorter, they might be a little darker. They are not I'm married to someone who's a lot shorter and a lot darker than me for almost 30 years. And she's not one iota less intelligent than me. But when she walks in the room and I walk in the room, people react to her differently.
Our next question asks, what specific Baha'i principle interested you the most and why did you become a Baha'i?
I became a Baha'i because I recognized Baha'u'llah as the messenger for our age. But what attracted me initially was the idea of unity, the idea that we're one human family. And that is, to me, the overriding Baha'i principle, the eradication of all prejudice and the uniting of humanity as one human family. If you look at all the key problems in the world today, I really think the source of them, and we mentioned racism, and we can mention sexism, the fact that women are not really side by side with men in running this world. If women were side by side running the world today with men, we would eradicate war. There's no question, because as the Baha'i writings say, women will not send their sons to be killed on average. Women are more peaceful on average than men. Not all women, but women on average are more averse to war. And so we need to we're like a bird. The Baha'i writings talk about women and men being wings of a bird, and that bird needs to be in balance. Racism deprives, as that letter said, deprives some of us, and it's some of us is the way to say it, even though I'm not one of the people who's deprived. Some of us are deprived of the ability to live a full life, and all of us are affected by this blight. So racism is, again, something that prevents humanity from really getting anywhere near achieving its its full potential. Nationalism as well. The idea that countries don't share with each other, the idea that we spend trillions of dollars on war. And religious prejudice. Religious prejudice being the greatest barrier to recognizing Baha'u'llah. You know, I said to someone today at the breakfast, if there was 1 billion Baha'is today in the world, world peace would be a assured thing, somewhere between 1 billion and 2 billion, in my opinion, maybe less. We would have world peace. All the weapons of war would be destroyed. And what's preventing us from knowing this is religious prejudice. Religious traditions. I talked to a minister today, and I said, when will Christ return? He said, well, when he's going to physically come down from the sky and people will be physically lifted. I said, well, the Pharisees 2,000 years ago had many physical expectations, none of which were met. And I said, how do we know? Physical signs. What if those physical signs you're looking for aren't going to happen? How would you recognize Christ when he returns? We have to recognize Christ and then do what he says. As someone just posted, race being the most challenging issue. Well, how would you know that unless you'd read the Baha'i writings? And we know that. And then work on it. I see so many Baha'is who are ardently working to fight racism. We need that inspiration.
Thank you. Another question asks, what would it take to create a free and equal internet service for the global community so that everyone everywhere has equal access? Right now, extremes of wealth and poverty perpetuate injustice.
So I think you have to reverse the extremes of wealth and poverty. And in order to reverse the extremes of wealth and poverty, we need to really get to a spiritual level where we eradicate the poverty in our hearts that's causing the extremes of wealth and poverty. So in other words, the extremes of wealth and poverty are caused because it's a spiritual problem. It's got a spiritual root.
The next question asks, many of our greatest challenges are global in nature. Do you support any international projects or agencies outside the USA?
We don't do a lot internationally. We do a little bit of work in India and a little bit of work in Africa, but we turn down almost everything internationally. Mona Foundation is maybe an exception. They're based here in America. And actually that's because the House of Justice or the Baha'i International Development Organization has told us, as we work very closely. One thing I did mention is Wayfarer Foundation is very, very closely with the institutions of the faith. And the reason we do that is we really want to be in line with Baha'u'llah's guidance, and the institutions are Baha'u'llah's guidance for this age. So the institutions, for those who aren't Baha'is, we don't have any clergy, but we have an administrative order. And so we're all trying to work together. And so I don't want to be doing something with a great example of this. Actually, my friend Raiden Wilson told me about this. He does a lot of work in Haiti. And in Haiti, a lot of very well-meaning philanthropists donated extra t-shirts, used t-shirts. And of course, that's great because they had free clothes and that was wonderful, except they unknowingly and unwittingly eradicated the garment industry, the clothing industry in Haiti, the native industry. So it actually had a net negative effect. I want to make sure every time I do philanthropy, I'm working with the institutions and trying to make sure that we're not doing things that inadvertently hurt the Baha'i Faith or the goals of the Baha'i Faith, which is uniting humanity.
Thank you. Another question asks, what do you mean by spirituality?
Well, spirituality is probably the spiritual virtues, love and kindness and mercy and compassion, the love of humanity, the love of God. So spirituality is really the spirit of all the messengers. The sunlight that Baha'u'llah is giving off, that Jesus gave off in his day, that Muhammad in his day. And religion is the container that holds that spirituality. So like the wings of a bird, spirituality and religion must be used together. Religion for the guidance and spirituality for the light. It's the light, the love, the spiritual teachings of that religion.
Thank you. Another question asks, do you see any countries or areas where humanity is seeing less addiction in the younger generations? And if so, how are they doing it?
I'm not an expert on that, but I would probably say that the more religion is there, the more spirituality is there, the less you'll see that. I was recently in Haifa with Baha'is, young Baha'i youth from all over the world, and I'm 100% sure that there's significantly less addiction for those kids in Haifa than there would be for kids elsewhere.
You might have touched on this, but someone asks, can you speak to any work you're a part of that is elevating Black and Indigenous peoples?
Well, yeah, 80 to 90% of the work I do, you can look up Wayfarer Foundation online and see what we do. We're going to have a racial justice conference later this month in Chicago with about 250 attendees. Last year, we brought together our Native American organizations that we support, our Native American partners, and brought them to Chicago, and we had a wonderful conference. So we do work every day, and then we're having these conferences kind of to help unite the work and the organizations. But 80 to 90% of the organizations we support are BIPOC. So yes, that's a big focus of ours. BIPOC serving and also BIPOC run. And that's true of Julian Grace as well. I built Shy Cat on the west side of Chicago for that purpose. We built a place for workforce development on the south side of Chicago. We're building another place in the west side of Chicago that's going to be a community center. So we do a lot of different things.
Thank you. Someone asks, are your foundations required to show success? Or like the ability to abuse? I don't believe that most people are trustworthy when it comes to money. If nonprofits worked, would there still be so many desperate people?
We do our best. So we give the money and then they're absolutely required to report. And so I do think we do a really good job with our foundations. It's one of the reasons I have the foundations, because I have the structure. It's not cheap to have a foundation. It'd be much cheaper for me to just give the money away, but that would lead us open to abuse. And I have seen that. And so some of the earlier giving I made was not as effective as some of the giving I'm making now, because we are checking and following up and making sure that when we give you money, that there's some reporting. So, we're not going to give you money again if you don't report to us and tell us what's happened with that money.
Mm-hmm. Someone asks, is spirituality lost today?
Spirituality is never lost. It's just put in the back room. Spirituality is from God. God never goes away. The spirituality is there for the taking. It's just that most people have turned away from it. It's not spirituality that's lost, it's us. Collectively, we've turned away from the spirituality and we become material. And we need to change that and reverse it.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? I'll pause for a minute. One question asks, what about requiring something like spiritual study in exchange for support?
We don't like that, to do that. We won't do that. We don't want people to study spiritually because they're forced to. We look for people who are already doing it, and then we give money to them. So in other words, we're not going to require that. We're just going to go. So we're definitely looking to fund spiritual study, but we don't want to force people because then they're not really serious about it.
Another question asks, are you doing any work involving ecology?
We are doing a little work involving ecology. My wife is on the board of Sierra Foundation. I would like to do more work on ecology than we're doing, but we're not doing a ton of work on it now. We're supporting one organization, which is trying to think, it has faith in the name. Faith in Action. It might be called that. So it has faith in it. Faith in Place. Faith in Place, which is in Chicago, and it's a interfaith group that supports environmental causes.
Another question is, what is the requirement to become a Baha'i?
The only requirement is belief in Baha'u'llah. So if you're interested, I would study with someone, and you can find Baha'is in your area. There's a wonderful group called a wonderful program called RUI, which is Baha'i study groups. And those Baha'i study groups are a great place to learn about the Baha'i faith. Once you've learned about the Baha'i faith, to become a Baha'i, you just sign a card, either online or in person, that says you believe in Baha'u'llah and you want to follow his laws and his guidance.
Another question asks, what's the process for
By the way, I just want to say, for me, 8 years ago, that was the best decision I ever made in my life. Not to sell the Baha'i faith, but I'm a very happy Baha'i.
We have a question that asks about the process for a project to become a recipient of Wayfarer Foundation.
So you have to be a 501c3, you have to be a nonprofit, and then you can just apply. And we have very strict rules. We don't give to everybody. In fact, we turn most people down. But if you have a project, or if you have a nonprofit that's serving your community and that has a spiritual bent, feel free to apply to Wayfarer. Just go to our website, Wayfarer Foundation.
We also have a question. Do you know the female Baha'i billionaire in Beijing?
She's in America. You're talking about Shin, and yes, I know her and have worked with her. And she's a fine Baha'i. She's really, she and her husband are both Baha'is.
Well, it looks like those are all the questions we have today. So I want to thank you again for the talk. And well, actually, we have another question. It's asking about the role of the institution of Hu'ula in solving the global economic problem.
That is a wonderful question. Hu'ula is giving away 19% of our excess wealth. And that is going to be, that's really the Baha'i faith. Eventually, as the Baha'i faith grows, the Hu'ula will grow tremendously, and that will eradicate poverty. So, because it will be, that's really, and it will eradicate poverty not just by poverty programs. I actually think a lot of poverty programs don't work. What Hu'ula will do is Hu'ula will actually address the root causes of poverty, and those root causes we've talked about quite at a great bit of length today.
Thank you. And another question asks, how do we bring spirituality to the schools?
I think it's difficult because, again, this is an answer. Depends on where the schools are. I think what you have to do, I think that the smartest way is to bring children's classes as a generic thing, take out all the religion part of it, start with just talking about the values, teaching love and kindness and mercy. My friend is a 4th grade teacher, and she told me a story a week ago where a student gave her the finger and then threw an iPad at her and then rolled up into a little ball. And she says, this is happening all the time. Students are in desperate need of the spiritual virtues. I'm actually investing, it's not a nonprofit thing, but I'm investing in a company, and I encourage anyone who has young children to look at this. Shadi Tului Wallace, who's a wonderful Baha'i, started this company called Tiny Souls Media. And so she's going to be taking the Baha'i, the spiritual virtues and putting them in songs and in media. And we're going to have a whole platform to do that. I think taking something like that to the schools was great. And it will never mention the word Baha'i. I think when you start mentioning religion, then because of religious prejudice, people, whether prejudice against religion or prejudice for a particular religion over the others, causes us to close our minds. And that prevents us from putting it into the schools where it's desperately needed.
Thank you. So if we don't have any other questions, then I want to thank you again for your talk and the follow-up discussion. I think we touched on a lot of different important topics. So thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me. And I encourage everyone, I guess I'll leave you with this. I encourage everyone to do what they can to make the world a better place. That's the most important thing. I'm doing it. And as I said, I fully admit that I'm a flawed human being, and I'm doing the best I can with what I have, but I encourage everyone to do that as well, and to realize that, we're only put on this world to serve, to really do what Baha'u'llah said, to serve humanity, each one of us is. And actually, if anyone's in Chicago, I want to do a plug for my theater. We're showing 2 films about Abdul Baha, one at 2:30, Luminous Journey, and one at 7 o'clock tonight, Abdul Baha in France. If you haven't seen that, I highly encourage you. And really look at the life of Abdul Baha. And what I encourage everyone to do is look at the life, whether you're a Baha'i or not, look at the life of Abdul Baha and try to walk in his ways. I do that every day. I fail every day, and then I wake up the next day and try to do it again. But I'm never going to give up trying.
Thank you. So our speaker for next week will be Peter Terry, and his topic will be The Religion of God Consists of 2 Parts. Thank you for joining, everyone. Hope to see you all next Saturday. Have a great week. Bye.